join me in welcoming Keynote Stacy Bare.
Thanks. Y'all are good? That's it. Yeah, it's amazing it's a great day to be here in Wyoming. This is not on. All right. I like it. Look at that. It's sort of like Jackson. You look at it, but is it really Wyoming? I'm kidding. I got a couple rounds of applause, some apologies out there. Yeah, what a great day to be in Wyoming. What a beautiful world we get to live in. Thanks so much for inviting me. Turns out I'm just here because I want the invite. I want the hat from Visit Casper. That's a cool hat, so I'll be angling for that later. My name is Stacy Bare. If you just saw the keynote speaker announcement and didn't look at the picture, you may be surprised. I just got recognized as a top 6% woman founder. So I got that email recently. That was really great. I get invited to these conferences all the time. I actually was in Jackson recently. I was the keynote to a women's leadership conference. They sent the invite out, and I'm always like, fuck it, I'll risk my hand. And you could tell in the Zoom that they did not know I was going to be a man. But we were already negotiating the contract, and they didn't want to say no. So that was interesting. That was a fun one. DEI is for everybody, my friends. So I grew up in South Dakota, the lovely state to the east, and I recoil when I hear about the numbers in Rapid City myself, because I'm from the east side of the state. And I actually wanted to come to the University of Wyoming. My best friend in high school, one of my best friends, was a year older than me. And he came out to Laramie, and he loved it. And he loved it so much that in December of his freshman year of college, his mom came out and drove him home before finals. And my mom said, "You're not going there. No to being a cowboy." So I enrolled at the University of Mississippi. I showed her, and she's like, "What are you doing? Why are you going to Mississippi?" I was like, "It's far away from Laramie, Mom." So it feels really good. I know we're not at Laramie, but there's a full circle moment speaking at a conference that's being promoted by the University of Wyoming. So also, I realized I gave that title, and I'm so sorry I gave that title. That is the worst title of a talk, and you all came anyway, as opposed to just skipping out and trying to get the Visit Casper hat and then coming back in for the conferences. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the transformative experience of the outdoors, but first I think we've got to define what transformative experiences are and how they fit into the broader narrative of both outdoor recreation as well as what's going on in our country and world today. And so follow me, if you will, to a dip in antiquity to help us understand where we're headed. How many of you are familiar with Homer's classics, the Iliad and the Odyssey? That's impressive. You all have a much better education system than South Dakota. Each story focuses right on two figures. Odysseus, the hero of the Odyssey, but he's a key, not a primary figure, right, in the first book, the Iliad. And so in the Iliad, for those of you who raise your hands because other people at your table raised your hands or didn't raise your hands, this is for you, right? Just a quick overview. So in the Iliad, the Greeks head off to war against Troy, which is in modern-day Turkey, for a scandalous reason that a woman who was living in Greece was kidnapped, or not, to marry a man her dad did not want her to marry, and then calls all the other sub-kingdoms of Greece together for war. So Odysseus, he's the king of Ithaca, so he's got to head off to war. So the war takes 10 years, that's the Trojan War, and at the end of the 10-year war, Odysseus sails off for home along with 400 other sailors. That also takes 10 years. And though he leaves for 400 sailors, he returns with none of them. They're all gone. Most of his trials took place in 3 years, and then he spent 7 years with a nymph, Calypso, on an island. So I think the real interesting thing here is that it is the first known example of gaslighting from a man in global literature. So eventually, the man they call the smartest of the Greeks, who's stuck with Calypso for 7 years, makes it back home, and it's a pig farmer who pulls him off the shore. Now, why would you take a pig anywhere near the sea? I don't know. It's a thing in the Bahamas, but it's funny because earlier in the story, and I always, when I read the Odyssey, I kept raising my hand in class and being like, I think this is a comedy. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, the pig farm, like, do you remember when the pigs ate Odysseus's men and now a pig farmer is bringing them back on? But my professor, like you all, reminded me that that's not funny. So I appreciate that. I won't try that one again. Anyway, so he goes out and he reclaims his throne. So that's ends up becoming, these combined stories get condensed by this author, Joseph Campbell, and he calls it the hero's journey in his book of The Hero with a Thousand Faces, or the monomyth. And he extracts it down to a 12-step program about the hero's journey. And he says that it's the most common narrative across time and geography on our planet. And I think most of us are familiar with this broad story arc. It's been adopted widely by multiple authors and screenwriters for decades and centuries. And I'm going to do a quick recap, right? So you have an unexpected hero living a calm and quiet life, and they're asked to go on a world-saving, town-saving, empire-saving, or at the very least, a life-changing journey. The hero, like Odysseus, denies the departure at first, and eventually goes off, finds a mentor, fights a great many battles, vanquishes the enemy, and then begins the long journey home. The journey home is where things get really juicy. The hero, almost always a man, enters into some sort of a real or metaphorical cave where they find out that the real danger is the enemy that lies within, and that individual has had the power to slay such a dragon all along. From the mouth of the cave, the hero goes through one final abyss, returns to their home shores, claims their rightful place as king, and vanquishes the enemies and naysayers. Success, right? What, if anything, does one do once they're back on the throne? We never get this part of the story. Do you, as perhaps we would hope, set up a pension plan, or at least meet with the families of the 400 plus sailors who were killed or disappeared during Odysseus' 10-year journey home? No. Do you grieve those you've lost, your peers during the war, before you started your journey home, or the lives of those 400 sailors? No. Do you thank your queen, or those who stayed behind keeping the home fires burning, like Odysseus' wife Penelope, or his son Telemachus, who was out looking for his dad when he returned? No, none of that. You apologize for nothing. You return to the start of the hero's journey, and you do it all again. In Hollywood and the great outdoors, a dumbed-down version of the hero's journey became the bedrock narrative we all live by. From the Lord of the Rings trilogy, to climbing in the Himalayas, to the Top Gun franchise, to events like Red Bull's Hardline and The Rampage, all follow the similar story arc of Campbell and Homer. It has historically been reinforced in the stories of our great outdoor heroes, our guides, our athletes, the brands, and it translates itself into marketing campaigns and the stories we tell. It starts with a chosen one of humble beginnings, truth be damned. How many of you know that Prana was started in a garage? How many of you know that the garage had 4 large garage doors? It devalues the support crew. It ends oftentimes with absolute carnage for most, but one hero out on top. There's minimal discussion publicly. Perhaps those discussions happen in private spaces or sometimes in small nonprofits quietly of who was lost and why, and what their lives will look like now that the hero has claimed the throne and they're left to pick up the pieces. The throne, however, is rarely ever enough. Not only does it get lonely on the pedestal, there's only ever room for one, but there are higher pedestals to climb, greater riches and glory to dream of, and besides, what else are you going to do with your day, right? Running a kingdom is hard, tedious work. Slaying a dragon is fun. One of Campbell's students, Maureen Murdoch, in 1990, asked her mentor about what role a woman could play in the hero's journey, beyond being a supporting cast member or the reason for the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell responded with none. So she wrote The Heroine's Journey, wherein the first step is for a woman to disassociate herself with femininity. And wow, have we seen this outdoors? Women who follow the same pattern laid out by men have, once they've got to the top, too often been roundly rejected by the same communities and brands they had hoped to inspire. I'm going to leave you there for a second and tell you a little bit more about my own journey. I used an Army ROTC scholarship to leave my little town. I traveled away to college. I was stationed in Germany. I deployed to Bosnia in 2003 and 2004, and I quit the Army when I couldn't find a path to Iraq or Afghanistan. Wars with justifications at least as solid as why the Greeks invaded Troy. That's also a joke. I did a couple of years of humanitarian landmine clearance in Angola and the former Soviet state of Georgia in a breakaway province called Abkhazia. For those of you who are still hoping for more of the classics conversation, this is about where Jason and the Argonauts found the Golden Fleece. I was waiting for a visa to enter southern Sudan and Uganda at a hotel at the headwaters of the White Nile, now submerged under a hydroelectric plant, in January of 2006, when I got orders to return to the United States Army and serve in Iraq. The porter at the hotel got him through a fax, came to my room, and said, "Mr. Bare, you have to go home and die for your country. We will miss you." So after about 90 days of training at Fort Bragg, I was stationed in Baghdad from 2006 to 2007. I was there, if you may remember, the Surge. I spent about half that year on a small forward operating base on a bend in the Tigris River in north central Baghdad. I was 500 yards away from Saddam Hussein, sleeping in my quarters when he was finally executed. My coming home was less than heroic. It included a lot of drug and alcohol abuse, and miraculously, a graduate degree from the University of Pennsylvania. At the end of that, with an economy collapsed, I got a job paying me less than half of what I was making in the US Army, rented a U-Haul, and drove it to Boulder, Colorado. I had to extend the rental time on the U-Haul for a week to find a place to live and to also buy a car, a Subaru Forester. I could barely afford it, but I had done counterinsurgency operations before, so that I knew if I had a Subaru and grew out my beard, I would fit in Boulder, Colorado. I also continued to consume unhealthy amounts of alcohol, but was mostly cut off from hard drugs because the student loan money ran out. What's fun, I love that you guys laughed at that one. Like the other jokes, you're like, no, and they're like, oh, he couldn't do drugs anymore because of the student loans. That's awesome. All the community college students are like, what? What? That's why you go to a 4-year school? I appreciate the 2 people who laughed at that. Less than 6 months after moving, I was honestly ready to die or return to the United States Army. I didn't like either option, but I was lost, I was alone, and deeply confused about who I was and why it took so much effort in the non-military world to get such little outcome. I called up a buddy I spent time with in Baghdad who lived in the Springs, and he encouraged me to hold off on any major decisions until I went climbing with him in the Flatirons. The actual call was, "Chuck, I think I want to kill myself or join the Army." And he was like, "Just wait a couple weeks and we'll go climb." So I did. I bought the largest climbing shoes available, a harness, a chalk bag, a belay device, and just waited until Chuck could haul me up the first Flatirons. I screamed "take" every time I moved my quivering body a few feet up the rock. I got to the top and I lost my mind. I'd never seen anything so beautiful. I shook, I cried. It was a somatic experience. For the first time ever, I wasn't fearful about my past or guilty that I had a future when so many of my friends didn't. Several months later, my contract was not renewed with the company that had brought me out to Boulder. And I was well on my way to starting a nonprofit called Veterans Expeditions with Nick Watson to bring other veterans out into the woods under the belief that if the experience was so good for me, discounting the challenges of my own traumas, how good could it be for other veterans who really deserved it? 2 winters after that first climb, I found myself in Ouray at the ice park, surrounded by men and women who had done all the things I was just starting to dream about. Folks who had climbed in the Himalayas, topped out on desert towers, skied backcountry bowls, and been in all the great ranges of the world. I was hungry for advice, for validation, and to learn what twists and turns I would need my own life to take to see those same lofty views. I shared my story with a new friend. He was actually last year's keynote speaker at this conference. And as we were coiling up ropes at the end of the day, talking about how much I wanted to get to where he had been, and concerned that I was starting this journey in my early 30s when others had started decades before, I told him it all felt out of reach. "Nonsense," he said. "You're just at the start of your hero's journey. In time, you'll find your throne." I had no real idea what the hero's journey was, But I threw myself into the recommended reading, and I got busy on my own professional journey that would unlock the doors to the treasure that I needed to fund the journey. I was living this narrative out, and that narrative had captivated the outdoor industry, if not industry in the global marketplace in general. And so it was that I walked through my very first outdoor retailer back in 2011. At the time, OR was a powerhouse that dominated not just the convention center, but all of downtown Salt Lake City. Every brand was represented in a collection of booths that would have made the Greek and Trojan kings jealous for the construction and space, the size and scope of each booth defining the hierarchy of the outdoor industry. There were endless free happy hours, free coffees, and even free ice creams to be found amongst its halls. I was hooked on the buzzy good times and opportunities that such a place showed me to be true. I rubbed elbows with my heroes in the hallways and got words of wisdom and encouragement. I even complimented Reinhold Messner on his hair. It was at these shows that I got to know legends like Lynn Hill, she was quite short, and Dean Potter, who was quite tall. Mostly because people always thought it was hilarious, and they were the first to ever think of a photo with Lynn in the middle and Dean and I on either side. I wish I would have kept one of those photos. Dean and I's friendship was based entirely on our shared height, and because his dog Whisper would often pee on me at various functions. I took Whisper peeing on me as a badge of honor and genuinely enjoyed my time with Dean, talking about everything other than climbing or base jumping. He was a warm person. He gave good hugs. He always had a lot of questions about what I was up to and why. We shared a lot of wry smiles. I miss Dean. I would sit through those events, transfixed by the speakers. I remember writing in my journal that I would know I had made it once I was invited to keynote one of the major industry breakfasts, or the University of Wyoming Outdoor Rec Summit. It was in these hallways as well that I found the treasure I was seeking. In 2012, determined that I would find the key ingredient to why Time Outdoors made people feel so good. I'll also be at the conference next week. I had launched a project that would become the Great Outdoors Lab with my colleague at the time, Kate Luby, a fellow South Dakotan. We were both working at the Sierra Club and trying to crack the code on greater funding for outdoor recreation and to create another bedrock justification for why public lands should remain in public hands. In partnership with Dr. Dacker Keltner and the Greater Good Science Center, we began to research the emotion of awe in the outdoors and came to the conclusion, the data-backed, scientific-backed conclusion, which is the foundational study of so much of the information you're probably reading today, that time outside can create a 30% reduction in post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, nearly a 20% reduction in regular stress, and a host of other positive side effects like increased curiosity, increased social connection, better sleep, reversing inflammation effects, increasing positive hormones. And not only was it the key ingredient to benefits of time outdoors, but that it helped us show that time outside wasn't just a nice to have, but a necessity. It sounds crazy now. We're a week before the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable's executive conference on health in the outdoors. But back then, brands were afraid to fund us or even talk to us in case our hypothesis was false. We had healthcare executives call us into meetings just so they could laugh at us in our faces because we had such a preposterous idea that time outdoors could be scientifically good for you. I wish we all could have gone in with Dominic. Then I think they really would have taken us seriously. But before we reached the conclusion, as we were doing the research, I got connected to the North Face. There was a small introductory film called Stacy's Story that TNF launched in an effort to win more of the patriotic and veteran-aligned market. Part of the reason that came down was because Stacy's Story has other implications if you click on an image search on Google. My last name means puddles in Serbo-Croat, but naked in English, and if you want to hear the story about how my mom learned about Google image search, I can share that with you. Anyway, that did well enough that a couple years later, I was able to take Alex Honnold, a couple years before Free Solo, back with me to Angola for a raucous good time with Vice Sports and a place where I'd kicked landmines out of the ground. And ultimately, I got my first starring feature in 2017. I went back to Iraq to lead 2 other veterans who had fought in the war to be the first recorded team to climb and ski down the tallest mountain fully in Iraq. That film's called Adventure Not War and is still out there. I came home a changed man. I was ready to finally be home. For the next few years, film festivals, podcasts, and speaking gigs, I got to step on my pedestal every night to share the hard-fought wisdom of my trials. my hero's journey. I embraced it, and I got to share it with audiences around the world. It was glorious. It opened up new opportunities, and with successful adventure films under my belt, a demonstrated record of corporate speaking successes, and showing brands that their return on investment was well worth it, I thought I was set for the next big journey. I came so close to so many big things. Just being up for consideration, I was told, is an honor. But you know what? Those honors don't pay the bills. My 4-year run with the North Face came to an end. I forged on an expedition in Afghanistan in 2019 with new partners. Ended up being a film that finally got released this past year through the official website for the Olympics. In 2020, I supported the launch of a Central Asian free skiing competition in Kyrgyzstan with Kyrgyz and Dutch partners that is now a freeride world qualifying event. That expedition too was immortalized in film. Making outdoor film that got published in 2020 was pretty miserable. I was flying back to the States from Kyrgyzstan in January of 2020 in time for my daughter's 4th birthday. My biggest payday for corporate speaking was on the horizon, and we joked that we all had the Kyrgyz cough. So my bad, it's my buddies and I who brought COVID to America. And as much as I'd like to blame everything that happened after that on COVID, the reality is far different. My life was falling apart. Many of the major no's and cancellations I got from my various professional and personal projects happened achingly close to the start of the pandemic. But it wasn't because of the pandemic. Thankfully for me, the pandemic made it so that I didn't have to really explain to anybody what I wasn't doing, what I thought I was going to be doing. It also gave me a maddeningly amount of time to look at what I was getting wrong. My home life was suffering. My daughter treated me at best as a fun uncle, and my wife was just surviving without the help I promised in our wedding vows because I was always gone. COVID strangely gave me a lifeline to rediscover and redefine myself beyond outside success, outside validation, or success in the outdoors. I gotta be honest, I wasn't that positive about the experiences I was going through it. There's a certain letdown going from platinum frequent flyer status and corporate speaker extraordinaire to driving a forklift for specialized bikes at the warehouse in Salt Lake City. I had been knocked unceremoniously from my throne. At first, I was sort of manically excited. This was another setting for a great hero's journey. After all, Campbell said, when one is complete, start it again. But I couldn't get started. I didn't have the energy. I couldn't find the support. Everyone else was going through it too. To the best of my ability, pretty minimal at the time though, I did my best every day to take advantage of what was offered. But I couldn't sleep at night. I was too anxious. I was fearful of losing my house. My ego trashed at having gone from National Geographic Adventure of the Year to forklift operator, from speaking at Fortune 500 companies to working at the literal lowest wage for one. But I had a ton of fun biking. On the days off with colleagues, we roamed all over. But in the long nights or on afternoons when I couldn't ride, I went from thinking I could restart another hero's journey to actually writing angry letters to Homer and Campbell in my head and on real paper. I imagined beating up that little fucker Frodo and Bilbo Baggins. Fantasy bullshit. When I exhausted myself with rage and anger and disappointment, I would find myself mourning a lot of my friends, those that were indeed dead, like Dean, and those who I had lost contact with or broken friendships over various behaviors on expeditions and in the outdoors. I began to suspect that the problem with the hero's journey wasn't just mine alone, but that many of us, thousands of us, were caught on a violent, addictive cycle of the hero's journey. Slay a dragon, walk through the abyss, crawl to the seat of the throne, get back to the start, repeat over and over and over again. How could I maintain friendships? I was either trying to be the hero or was one of the hundreds of expendable sailors trying to get some other hero back to the top. My community of veterans and adventurers was declining with each violent revolution of the hero's journey. As individuals passed on, dead, maimed, disappeared, lost in rehab, another dozen or 100 more vied for the new vacancy on the boat or the now empty throne. Employment numbers and opportunities seem to be in a similar state of attrition across my beloved outdoor industry. Digital sales, direct-to-consumer brands, the childlike wonder many of us have in the outdoor industry without proper financial or business education that makes the industry what it is, wrecked us when it came to understanding supply chain management and logistics. The industry got ravaged by outside investment that didn't understand our core customer and a belief that the sales numbers of COVID would be the new normal versus a one-time event. As the dust settled though, most brands and the people who make up those brands did what they had always done. Went back to the start of the hero's journey and found new dragons to slay. I ended up moving on from my forklift job to a job as a civilian with the United States Air Force. It was at this time I wrote a goodbye letter to the outdoor industry. Got a lot of play on social media. I felt pretty good. Who gets to attend the memorial of their own career like I do? I entered the Air Force. I had to buy khaki pants and new dress shirts. I was, for the first time since founding Veterans Expeditions in 2011, out of the outdoor industry. Just a consumer again with no brand discounts. As you all know, full price sucks. 6 months later, my wife and I acknowledged that the mountains, which had been calling us both for years, had hung up, probably years ago. We were too busy, however, living our lives, too concerned with hurting one another to acknowledge that we had no longer been feeling that call. What was that? Another major landscape feature could call us as well? Who's on that caller ID? It was the Great Lakes. So we began to look for work. And lucky for me, there was a job in Parks and Recreation. And honestly, had I known how much of my time would have been spent dealing with pickleballers and the desire to pave over more towns, I wouldn't have taken the job. Many of my colleagues from the outdoor industry were surprised we'd head off to West Michigan. We were surprised that we would go to Parks and Rec because a lot of times we don't think of the outdoor industry and Parks and Rec in the same sentences. They were surprised that after a career of encouraging play and conservation in endless vistas and thousands of acres of places and spaces, that I would then focus on what we could do in 1 to 5 acres in the middle of an old Rust Belt city. If the heroes I had loved were great because of the Himalayas of 14ers, I wondered as I drove back across the country, what would it be like with a high point of my local ski hill at 220 feet? But here's where, for me, I began to separate myself from the national conversation. And I think it gets interesting because in 2022, when my family and I made the move back, mainly for fish fries, walleye, and tater tot hot dishes, the industry was just beginning to reckon with something I had been struggling to see. And I think I've heard you already talk about it so much here, and I see it in the sessions. The broad market for the outdoor industry was far less concerned in 2022 with the epicness of the hero's journey, with being hardcore, than they were in simply getting outside for laughter and joy. Cotton actually will rarely ever kill you. What defined a transformative experience was changing for many. Hammocking, for example, watching light filter through the leaves in quiet, can promote awe as much as a multi-pitch climb. It's cheaper, it requires less time, less physical commitment, and it isn't better or worse, it's just different. It has taken several years, though, for the industry at large to recognize this seismic shift. I don't know if they've got it yet. We're moving from outdoorsy to outsidey, and it's happening all across the country and the world. To be fair, many groups, often marginalized from the mainstream of outdoor industry, had long ago left behind the hero's journey. Many brands, though, kept doubling down again, if not on the actual hero's journey, its remnants. The hero's journey is linear. It requires violence or the threat of great loss and is perhaps based on the belief that our first tools as humans were also linear and violent, designed for killing and hunting for our survival. But author and philosopher Ursula Le Guin had years ago posited a counter-narrative to the hero's journey. She called it the carrier bag of fiction. And it's based on research that our Paleolithic, Neolithic, and prehistoric ancestors who lived in everywhere but the Arctic or Antarctic ate 65 to 80% of their diet from fruits and vegetables. Now, I get that saying that too often might get me kicked out of Wyoming, but the thing is that those people would not need their sharp, pointy tools or your traditional Homeric or Campbellian hero to carry a bag or a basket. Bags and baskets are easy to make, to share, to carry. You can carry it together. You can carry it by yourself. You can put in food, seeds, haul water, haul people if they're too young, too old, or too infirm to make the journey for themselves. And what that does is it creates a lot of different kinds of stories, because the activities that a bag engenders, gathering, holding, nurturing, delivering, feeding, watering, have overlapping purpose. And with that, collective and nonlinear storytelling around cooperation, problem solving, and nuance. What's crazy about this carrier bag is that it can also hold the hero's journey. as part of a richer whole versus the only narrative. The converse isn't true. A sword cannot carry a bag. And I know some of you back there are going to be like, but if you use the flat of the sword, then just go with me on the metaphor. And without hesitation, so many of our current consumers and outdoor participants who make up our livelihoods, whether they be in a city or national park, are walking away from Odysseus. They're refusing to sail to Troy, let alone from Troy, if they've ever been interested in the ships in the first place. Because the hero's journey without the proper context is turning out, it doesn't even have the proper ending. We don't even know the full story. It's worn out its welcome here in the outdoor industry. It's having an extinction gasp all across the world. Near the end of the Odyssey, and Campbell never covers this. This is never covered in Hollywood. So at the end of the Odyssey, the prophet who sends him on all of these journeys, who's a non-binary, gender-transforming prophet, has been a man and a woman and then a man again, gives Odysseus one final task. That task, once he had regained the throne of Ithaca, was to walk with an oar from his ship so far inland that people didn't recognize it as an oar, but a winnowing shovel. A winnowing shovel is a tool for separating chaff and pests from grain. That is not a heroic task. Here then, if Odysseus did this work, his journeys and his restlessness would end. And that's where I think we are right now, many of us, in this mythical agricultural village, where also this is where we turn swords into plowshares. But it's a disorienting place if you've spent your life rowing warboats up and down mythic shores. The catch, like I said before, is that being a hero is relatively easy. War, for all its costs and aftershocks, is very straightforward. You identify the enemy, you chase after the enemy, or you get chased by the enemy, you destroy the enemy, or they destroy you. In war, there is no time for nuance or conversation about the philosophical underpinnings of why you're fighting or who the enemy is. I remember when I was on patrol in Baghdad, we bagged and tagged these guys. They shot at us. We shot back. We bagged and tagged them. We took the bags off their heads, and immediately they wanted to know if any of us were from Nebraska because that's where their cousin was from. It's really interesting thinking like this person's trying to kill you and hates America and then is like, and I'm like, yeah, I'm from Nebraska. I was born there. But no, I don't know who your cousin is. And then like having an argument with him as to why I was a Lakers fan instead of a Bulls fan. And then I was like, God, shut up. Like, I got you. This isn't the other way around. Similarly, in the outdoors, it's easier to approach a summit, to weather days in the cold rain, to inch ever upward towards a summit, than it is oftentimes to motivate a community to build 6 miles of trail. It's easier to train and win a race than it is to identify and coordinate the removal and replanting of even 10 acres of invasive species, or 1 mile of trail rebuild. I'd encourage all of you to work with your local municipalities to plant and maintain 100 trees in your hometown boulevards as you train for your next 100-miler. Repair the access route to your favorite crag before trying the next 5 badass you want to climb. It isn't that there's anything inherently wrong with climbing most summits. Spiritual considerations obviously need to be taken into account, rather that it's important to ensure throughout the ecosystem of adventure and recreation, maintenance and community engagement with all of our neighbors, whether they be 2-legged, 4-legged, wiggly, wobbly, rooted, winged, or hooved, are all included in the process. If we're to move forward with any sense of health as a nation, health as a state, let alone the world, or even outdoor recreation, we need to recognize that what we have been doing is not sustainable. It's not sustainable in our industry, it's not sustainable for land, it's not sustainable for our municipalities or long-term engagement with the broader community. As much as I appreciate the hard shift in our community that we have made towards economic numbers for promoting outdoor recreation, and those are important, we cannot commodify our way out of the mess we're in. The economic objectification of our industry offers an imperfect way to argue the economic impact. And I think we all know the numbers, and you should know these numbers. $1 of trail equals $3 of saved healthcare annually. $1 of trail equals $2 to $3 of economic return. $1 investment in public lands returns $700 to the community. Those are impressive numbers, but we are still losing. We are losing. The outdoor industry is what we want. The stakeholders are distributed. It's not consolidated. But if success in public lands looks like what's happening in Moab or Jackson Hole, who can participate? Who wants to, and at what cost? Are the ecosystems around Moab healthier now than when it was a mining town in the 90s? One of the fears that I heard from residents in the fight over the designation of the Bears Ears National Monument was around rural gentrification and displacement. They were basing it on what happened in Boulder, Utah. I worked for the Sierra Club. I was on the side of the designation, but I know what I look like when I show up. The number of times I heard people tell me that they wanted to kick the shit out of an environmentalist and then ask me what I did. I worked for the Sierra Club. And the number of conversations and people that I got to meet through that who are still friends today. Because I was able to break down those barriers. Because you all know the adage, it takes a big man to cry. It takes a bigger man to laugh at the man who's crying, and not a lot of people are bigger than me. So you get to meet a lot of really interesting people. But look, I don't blame them. I agree with the land and water protections. But is the name right? Is the designation correct? It creates a knee-jerk reaction in real estate markets that prioritize everyone other than those who live there, the people who actually make the community work, not who just show up for a couple months out of the year. Each of these designations has within it a crowning moment that leaves the locals and the ecosystems wondering, to what end does this designation help? Does it protect the species in the watersheds, the nests, the burrows, the trees, and the flowers? We're not separate from those things. We are those things if we believe in place. And does it stop destruction nearby? There are signs that the hero's journey, the narrative of the hero's journey, is the only thing is falling apart. Even at the highest levels of paid performance adventure. When a small Minnesota bike brand puts together a sold-out festival in the Keweenaw Peninsula and my home state's Upper Peninsula that's all about riding without competition, that's one thing. But when Red Bull presses pause on hardline whales, and athletes and organizers are publicly discussing if Red Bull Rampage has gone too far, there is a shift in the zeitgeist that has been bubbling for years. So what do we do? What do we do? What do I want you to talk about the next couple days? And I want to be clear, I made a living in part because of the hero's journey. My movies were about the hero's journey. And I love outdoor film. And I consume a lot of mountain biking content on YouTube. My daughter loves Robin Gooms. She's a veteran and she's a woman. She is the best. When Norco and Adidas started their mountain bike team, my daughter, she's 10 years old. She's like, that's where I want to ride. They put women on the front cover. That's what she wants to do. We love watching Fabio Wibmer. And the coolest I have ever been in my daughter's eyes is when she found out that Faction Skis, which is the brand that Candy Tobex rips, sponsored me for Iraq from Adventure Not War. And she's like, that's your ski buddy? No, he's not my ski buddy. We were on a phone call with him once and we invited him and he said, no. That's French for no. And that's the only time I've ever talked to Candy. But still, we shared the same ski company. So what do? We've tried hard. We really have. We've tried to win the hearts and minds of the population and our legislators. And thank you to the legislators who are in the room. You have a thankless job. To the county commissioners who are in the room, you have a thankless job. But I want to thank you. I appreciate how hard you work, even if I don't agree with you and you don't agree with me. That's the beauty of it. People need to step up. Run for office. Everyone in this room should consider running for office, especially the younger folks. You have the time, you have the energy, and you have a vocabulary that nobody else understands. Write the legislation we need. But we tried to win the hearts and minds of the population. We've climbed faster, higher. We've rode further than anyone thought possible. We've made breathable and waterproof fabrics. Just kidding, that'll never happen. It doesn't exist. But we've jumped from ever increasing heights. We've swam to ever deeper depths. And yet we're still watching as our forests are clear cut. We're still watching as shoe companies Mining companies dump toxic waste in rivers and lakes and say they don't have to clean it up or shouldn't at least have to pay for all of it. We're watching our landscapes getting cut into 5-acre parcels with houses built on there that could hold the entire town of Shoshone happily. We cannot afford those homes, not sustainably, and because we couldn't afford it anyway. We work in the outdoor industry, and people don't even live there year fucking round. What are they doing? So what do? We try softer. We subjectify versus objectify the wild places we love. We throw in the statistics, sure. But the focus of the story has to be on revitalization and health and transformation, of gathering and growing, of harvesting versus reaping. Provide an array of transformational experiences. Create a graceful exit path for those stuck on thrones or in the addiction of the hero's journey. 1 or 2 is fine. 3 and 4 and 5 is not. It is killing us. We create opportunities for mentorship and community engagement for those who once rampaged across the landscape. If you run an event or a race, give discounts to those who participate with vetted organizations that motivate, organize, and deploy volunteers on trail maintenance, tree planting, or habitat restoration. If you sell anything, come up with a discount plan. We know you can't always give cash, but maybe there's a discount for people who can prove that they're showing up and doing the work to maintain and grow our infrastructure and our community. If you make marketing and videos or campaigns, highlight the sense of awe and purpose that comes after a day of planting trees, removing invasives, or replanting native plants. I guarantee you, if you create the opportunities for good service work, people from all over the country and the world will come to do it here in Wyoming. And if you show up with cowboy boots, they'll be really impressed. We have to love our way out of this problem. We have to community our way out of this problem. We have to join hands and welcome in new hands to create opportunities for transforming experiences from the doorway to the mountaintop and everywhere in between. From building to using and resting in this wild and gorgeous, awe-inspiring world. That's what we have to do. And what happens if we don't? What happens if we stick to the hero's journey on an endless loop? We are reaping those consequences right now. A $35 billion backlog of maintenance in national parks, ecosystems that support our work are at a greater risk of disappearing or are already gone. Trails are getting flooded out and not rebuilt. Forests are burning. Public lands are being surrounded by private property and blocked off from use. Endless development in sacred spaces. Higher rates of suicide in mountain towns than non-mountain towns because you can't make a living off of stoke alone. We are watching our heroes die or fade away or be fodder for one last documentary like my friend Dean. Nobody ever says Graham Hunt's name. He died too. Didn't Graham matter? And here's the thing. Odysseus never walked the oar inland. How could he? He swam ashore. Instead of ending his journeys, he was, as far as we know, stuck in the cycle of the hero's journey. What happened next is up for pretty serious debate. There's only fragments of stories. It's fictional anyway. None evidently by Homer. Some tell the tale of him heading off to kill the suitors of his wife Penelope. A handful claim he ruled peacefully. Others say he was forced from Ithaca due to political unrest. Because that's what happens when you don't say anything about the 400 lost soldiers. The lost epic Telegenia tells the story of Telegonus, who was one of the children Odysseus evidently fathered along the way. The son ends up killing his father in a one-on-one battle on the shores of Ithaca. Campbell doesn't tell us part of this story. These steps are not listed in the hero's journey. Enough of us have died. Enough of us have gone or got maimed. We've lost enough forest. We've choked too many rivers dry with the needs of alfalfa and turf grass. We've blown up enough mountains and dug enough pits that we will never fill. Take your hero's journey, though. Shred the gnar, seek the high places, run the rapids, wake up early to see the trout rise. Do it today. But make sure to live for more than just the sharp end of adventure, lest we lose the ability to adventure at all. There is awe in the slow work of tending to nature, of planting and caring for trees, of working necessary legislation to completion. Transformation and heroes have far more than 1,000 faces. Good luck out there, and make friends with the dragon.